All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us for another episode of Triple Play. And thank you for listening in. We want to just give a shout out to our sponsor, Brookes Bible College. If you are thinking about a Bible college, think about Brookes Bible College. We really, really enjoy that partnership. They're a great Bible college here in the Midwest, located in St. Louis. They offer great degrees in both theology, if you want to be a pastor, or counseling. And in that, they do it at a cost that's much more efficient. If you go to a regular Bible college, you're going to come out with probably somewhere around $80,000 to $100,000 worth of debt. You go to this Bible college, you may not come out with any. And that's important because the average church size is 75 people. That's the average church size in America, 75 people. You're not going to be pastoring a church of 75 people if you've got, $100,000 in debt, unless you got wealthy people in that church. You better have some very wealthy people in that church. So, that said, chances are if you're looking to get into ministry, or if you want to be a missionary, and you need to get a good degree to start off that course, this is a place to go and consider. I literally was having a great conversation about eschatology last night with the president, Robert Thurman, and I just can't say enough about him. So that's consider Brookes Bible College. And moving on, we got to talk. We've already had this deep conversation, and we got to jump into the actual podcast, right? So
podcast number 2.
Yeah, exactly. But we have a great guest today. You were actually introduced to me. I haven't met you until today, but I was introduced to you through Twitter, and you've been highly touted by the great Marv. And our viewers know Marv. He's been on here several times from MAC, the Missouri Association for Creation. But he was bragging to me about this young guy who's been coming in and just did this series at MAC that was just phenomenal. And I said, well, I'd like to get to know this guy. And he said, well, we need to get him on your podcast, Josh. I said, well, absolutely. Just tell me when. He said, well, he teaches, so we got to do it over winter break. I said, well, you tell me today, and we'll try to work it in, and we'll get it done, because I'm excited to get to know. I love creationism. I even know that guy over there loves it even more. So this is going to be a lively discussion, because I'm probably more on the eschatology, and you're definitely more on the creationism, for sure. Mm-hmm. The science part. I love that. So anyways, without any further ado, we have Joel, and you're, I want to make sure I say this right. You're a biologist, but you're not just any, right?
So,
give me your pedigree. I know it's PhD.
Molecular.
Yeah, my PhD is in molecular biology engineering.
Thank you.
So, biology, but more specifically, the type of biology that you can't see without a very expensive microscope. Although, I'm my trajectory has changed throughout the years. I'm more of a just science lover, whether that be in the field of research where I spent 10 years, or now I'm currently an educator in high school science education is what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. And you said you were in research. What'd you research?
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit. First of all,
maybe we should ask you what's your
back all.
Yeah.
Let's start with where you got this love of science. Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe where you grew up and how you came into love, and to get maybe a little bit about your testimony. So
yeah, well, I do want to start by saying thanks for having me.
Thanks for calling.
When Mara first mentioned this, and I was like, okay, so what is Triple Play?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, it's the sports, faith, culture. And I'm thinking, look, they got the wrong guy if they want to talk sports. So I had to double check and make sure that you had the right idea in mind. I do think I know which end to hold the bat, but that's about where it stops, Scott. So sorry.
That's a good start. You can take over the rest. Just swing.
So but then when they said, they just talk faith, science, culture, whatever. Well, science, yes, that's what I love. Have as long as I can remember. Grew up in a Christian home, so I do, and I had a very good experience with that. Some people grow up in a Christian home and they're turned off by some of the, hypocrisy that's common in Christianity and in general. That was not the case. It was a very genuine exposure that I had to Christianity, and I made my own personal decision to follow Christ at a very young age. And that's where the journey began for me. And then any Christian's going to deal with this. It's one of those great conundrums for Christians, is how do you tie in your faith in Christ to like your earthly pursuits that you love, the things that you just love. And to me, that was science and nature in general. Like I just loved birds and trees and being outside and hiking and those sorts of things.
So you joined the right podcast. 'Cause we're huge fans of that stuff.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you were asking me today, like, would you like to go play a video game or would you rather go on a hike? I would choose a hike any day.
Okay, good.
If you ask me what I would love to do when I retire, it would be fishing and hunting and pretty much cut myself off from the world.
Yeah, and
Live off the grid.
And you're talking to a kid that used to walk around with a bug catcher when I was like from like 4 to 7. I used to just walk around the yard, and if I saw something, I would catch it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Then this is the right.
I wasn't into the molecular part yet, but
you got into that. It's funny because you really was it during your baseball days that you really got into that?
just I research. If I don't understand something, like when the vaccine came out and I originally heard there was mRNA, I started researching what mRNA is and refreshing from high school biology. But just refreshing that and learning about the sequencing, the proteins, everything that's involved. It's stuff like that.
So funny you mentioned that, because as I speak on this topic pretty regularly, as the Lord opens doors, it's not a full-time gig or anything. It's just a true love of mine. That is probably the number one question right now is mRNA. What is it? Which is funny coming from now. I spent 10 years in which I'll get to. I know we're kind of running a rabbit trail.
We'll go wherever this takes us.
Yeah, we just had like a good conversation. So
I spent 10 years in molecular research. mRNA is just one of the many things that you deal with all the time. And there's nothing nefarious about that. It's part of biology. You're packed full of mRNA right now. Mm-hmm. And, but because of the association with the vaccine and COVID, it is like the number one question that comes up.
Yeah.
What is mRNA? So I'm not going to try to answer that question right now. But
well, if you could maybe like explain it like you would maybe to like an 8-year-old.
Yes,
you can. I don't know.
No, that's
not. If you can't think of something, we can skip right over it.
So in our bodies, everybody knows about DNA. DNA doesn't do anything. DNA is just a static, motionless, doesn't do anything. It just sits there. And then you have the proteins, which are the actual building blocks, the Legos that make up the body. But the DNA encodes the information, the instructions to make all those different Legos. However, because the DNA doesn't move, it doesn't do anything, it's stuck in one spot in the nucleus of the cell. And the proteins have to be made outside of the nucleus. So you need something that transports the information from the DNA out to the factory where the actual proteins will be made. And so that's all mRNA is. Like needs to be no more or less confusing than that. It is a temporary message, a temporary copy of the piece of DNA that you're making, the cell's making at the time, sends it out into the cytosol where the factories are that make it, and it uses that temporary copy to make as much as it needs of that protein. It's just a temporary in-between step in this manufacturing of the proteins. There's a lot to it besides that, because that mRNA gets processed, and in order to be read properly, certain sections have to be cut out of it, certain sections have to be retained, and which is mind-blowing.
I just
how complex this process of creating that protein is.
It's insane. I don't know if there's a video going around right now of the process of cell division, and I never knew this, but there's little tensils that get placed on there for when it's about to split, and if the copying hasn't been completed by the mRNA, the tension's just slightly off, and so when there's a certain tension that these cells know that when it hits that tension, that's when the cell breaks.
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of these checkpoints that are all feeding back into the system, such that when the next step doesn't proceed until the current step is completed. And this leads into this overarching conversation that we're having of so what leads you to believe in a creator?
Yeah.
Well, just look at it. And you start to see an incredible design, which even secular scientists recognize. But they are, and I mean this very respectfully, willingly ignorant. So it's like you have to try really, really hard to ignore that design, and they do, and they're very good at it now to just try to overlook and explain around that design. But sometimes when they're not careful, even a secular scientist will catch themselves saying it's ingeniously designed. And so I think that's leading into the bigger question of, yeah, you love science, but then how does that tie into the Bible and creationism and that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, well, in your presentation, because I think a lot of what you did with your presentation probably is the basis of a lot of that too. You did this presentation back, and you did, I'm trying to remember, it was
So
worldview, right? It was worldview, and then it was origin of the universe, origin of life,
Yep.
origin of species, and then you kind of did a wrap it up one, right? If I understood it right, is that right?
That's exactly right. And I think, I mean, you really, it's hard to deal with this topic piecemeal.
Right.
That happens a lot, and I get it, whatever, you only have so much time. It's hard to deal with a topic piecemeal, though, because it is a complex topic that requires some careful understanding of what's going on. And so I really like to start with that zoomed out worldview perspective of what are our core beliefs. We have them. Everybody has them. The secular scientists have them. And without first understanding which core beliefs people are operating under, you're never going to get anywhere in a conversation. You're just going to be talking around in circles. So I always start with that zoomed out view, but then like to zoom into those three pillars that every worldview has to try to explain is the origin of non-living matter. Stuff. How did that stuff become alive? And then ultimately, how did that life develop into complex organic beings like us? Every worldview tries to explain that in some way. And of course, I do too. And my beliefs start with the Bible, and therein lies a big difference.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say, you, because of your core beliefs, I know are started with the truth. Because of your knowledge of how God made things and how He sustains things, that only because you're building off the truth you're just stacking truth to yourself on top of truth, and it's just reaffirming you along the way, right?
That's exactly how it was in my case. Now, that's not everybody's case, in that there are plenty of examples of people out there that actually start from a secular perspective. Like, they don't believe in the Bible, but they go into the science and they start to see this complexity that we're talking about, and it's just screaming design.
Yeah.
Which Romans chapter 1 says it will. It says that the invisible things of God are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. And so we know that that's going to happen as people as they approach creation and design. It just screams at them.
Yeah.
And that has spoken to a lot of people, but they have to be willing to then shift in worldview, and that's a very painful process.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just like you're building a tower, I mean, they're coming from a place where they have their tower built, where you got to start removing those pieces, right?
Yeah.
With little pieces of information, truth.
Or even starting to build it from the ground up. Maybe, I think of like Helmet.
Maybe
when he was here, he went to school and he wasn't quite, but as he studied more and more, it just started building that. Did you meet Helmet?
I have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I met him in the Quad Cities.
Helmut.
Yeah. Yeah. We had him on here earlier this year.
Oh, very good.
And his testimony was a little bit about that, how he went to college, and as he got there, he kind of had a little bit of a religious background, but not a ton. And that really, as he started studying science, it just, as you said, screamed at him. And
Somebody planted a seed that was growing in him.
well, yeah, I mean, he grew up with, I think, a faith backing, but he just wasn't really, hadn't really, if I remember, I'd have to go back and listen to the episode, but I think he said that he really just wasn't big into it. But that actually was the spark that really ignited him as he studied science, and it became very obvious to him that there was a creator.
Is there, as you're having conversations with people that have different worldviews, is there maybe there's one truth about molecular biology or something that scientifically that you typically go to if somebody's in close, like let's say they're close to being in a position to hear the truth, and it, they're kind of curious. Is there a truth about science that that you go to, one or two or three things where you can just kind of say like, this is pretty good evidence. This is really, I want to tell this person this thing. Maybe it'll flip the switch on for them.
So I think, and remind me of that question.
That's okay. Yes,
I do want to.
I'll come back to it.
I want to go back to the story real quickly, just so for the listeners' perspective. I think it'll help them in understanding where I've come from. Although I grew up in a Christian home, I did not get this just one-sided view of the world. So I got my undergraduate degree in biology education. I like teaching. It's my true love. But then from there, I didn't want to be a teacher that taught about things that they had never done. I wanted to be an actual scientist first. And so I went into my master's degree at the University of West Florida in Pensacola, Florida area. And I did a master's degree in genetics. So that's what routed me towards the molecular side. We studied fruit flies and Alzheimer's disease proteins in fruit flies, which fruit flies don't actually get Alzheimer's disease, but they have the same proteins, which in humans can result in Alzheimer's disease. And so spent several years studying fruit flies there. And then from there went into my PhD at Cornell University. And that's when you even get more specialized. So I was genetics, and then I went into molecular biology and genetics. So a lot more at the molecular level. At the fruit fly side, it was just a lot of crossing fruit flies. So yeah, I spent then 6 years at Cornell University and loved it. Like it was, all politics aside, okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
The Ivy Leagues are a fun place to be because there is just a lot of energy and resources there around learning. I was in the sciences side. Keep me away from the humanities. I mean, but on the sciences side, it is such a fun place to be because there's an enormous amount of resources, microscopes that cost more than mansions, and they're all at your fingertips. And so here's the way it works with grad students. Grad students don't get paid much, but you do get paid to go to most graduate programs. You don't get paid much. And that's by design, because then if you want to do something fun, the fun thing is playing with the expensive tools at work. And so that's how they kind of motivate research. If you want to do something fun, then you go play with the expensive tools. And it was really a dream come true, getting all that hands-on work in mice. So I studied mice and mouse embryonic development. So we dissect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mice and get the embryos out. And we studied the process of how the brain, the early brain, which starts out as a flat sheet, it rolls up into a hollow tube, flat sheet to hollow tube. And I mean, it's almost miraculous when you see this. But we studied the proteins involved in that process. So from there, I went on to the next step, which is in the sciences. That's called a postdoc. If you want to keep doing research, you finish your PhD, you go on to a postdoc, which is another research position at another lab that brought me to St. Louis. We studied spinal cord regeneration in zebrafish, and I did that for a year. And at that point, I had 5 children, and my wife and kids now, we live here in St. Louis.
Do you have 5 or do you have more?
Oh, I have 7 now.
All right. Well, he beats me. I have 6.
Number 8 is on the way. So,
well, congrats. That's awesome.
Are you going to stop or just... No?
Hey, blessed is the man that hath his quiver full. And I don't know how big our quiver is.
So you got a 12-passenger van? I mean, you got
15 passengers.
Okay, I was going to say I have an Armada, and we often joke like if we ever want to have another one, it's going to be the 12-passenger van. So
no, yeah, you're right there. Yeah. Well, anyways, so that influences my life priorities. Family is a huge part of my life priorities, and that came into conflict during my postdoc because it ended up being more demanding and more pulling me away from my family than I was willing to do. So I did that for a year, and then I went back to my true love of teaching. So ironically, I'm a high school science teacher, which you don't need a PhD to teach high school science.
But it helps.
Just so our listeners know. But I found this really unique place here in St. Louis. It's called Little Creek Nature Area. It's an outdoor 100-acre classroom owned by the Ferguson Florissant School District, public schools of science. and been there 5 years, and it's all about teaching out in nature. So it kind of took me full circle back to my true love of nature.
That's cool.
We study birds and trees and bugs and all that great stuff.
That's awesome.
Okay. So I thought that full picture would be useful. I spent 10 years in secular academia. It wasn't that I was just, sheltered in a church my entire life. So I've been on both sides, and I come away from this, especially on the molecular side, with just an incredible, I don't know how people look at it and come to a different conclusion, that we were not an accident,
I look at the same. I do the same thing. I love looking at the stars. I've got a couple telescopes. I love astronomy, and anytime I look at those, I just think, how can you think that just happened? It just blows my mind. I mean, and what we're finding with the James Webb, how we keep finding more and more and more, and everything we thought we knew keeps getting thrown out the door. It blows my mind away. Like, how can you just think that some spark caused all this, and then when we're talking about, like, we had Marvin here and we're talking about the giraffe and the complications of a giraffe, how, it's got to pump blood all the way up to its brain, how it's got to have the sponge underneath the brain, the shutoff valves when it goes down, the lung capacity to pull air down. I mean, all this stuff is so complicated. And then you got to have two of them happen at the same time because they got to reproduce. So when I start to study all that, it blows my mind. I just don't. We talked earlier about mental gymnastics. I think you almost have to just start doing mental gymnastics to get to these other conclusions, because it just seems to me so evident that they're just
said it. They're willingly ignorant.
Yeah, but it very much seems very evident to me that this could not have just been a spark that just happened. And then you got all these different species. We're not just, that was just the giraffe we're talking. I mean, everything's from, the micro to the macro to all the different species. I mean, how many species do we know of beyond animals and humans? I mean, and all the variations in between and the adaptations of all those. I mean, it just blows my mind. How do you think that just happened?
No, and I think it's interesting, wherever the Bible really wants to highlight the greatness of God, it goes to creation. Mm-hmm. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy hands, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And in that same Psalm 8, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name. It's like, whenever it really wants to highlight the greatness of God, it points to his creation. And as a molecular biologist, I can understand why, because it blows your mind when you start seeing it. I remember the first day, so I was doing this experiment. We were trying to look at the neural tube closing, and in order to do this, we were taking these tiny, fraction of a millimeter section of these embryos, and then we were throwing them under a electron microscope to try to look at the cells at that high, 10,000, 20,000 magnification. And I'd never done this before. So I'm looking on the electron microscope, and you've got the screen up there, and you're moving through looking at these cells, which it's really hard to find where you're at in a cell at that magnification. And I came across this structure. So this structure is something I'd only ever read about in textbooks, and you may have heard the name before. It's called a centriole. Now, it's not the most famous structure in the cell, so most people have no idea what it does. But it's basically the highway department of the cell. So it builds roads all over the cell, and then other things walk along those roads and deliver proteins. Anyways,
there are actual things though too, right? It's not like you're saying it's like a robot that goes along the.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's not another living thing inside the cell. It's one of the many proteins.
Yeah.
Kinesin is the one you're thinking of that walks.
Literally has feet that walk along. I gotta show you these things. It's crazy.
Anyway, so this is the road builder that makes those roads that they walk on, and I'd only ever seen it in textbooks. And it has this really interesting design where it's got these 3 rings that are all in a clump. So you've got a group of 3 rings, and it has 9 of those groups, all in a spiral. And I saw it in this microscope. Never seen one before except in a textbook. And you could not look at that as you're scanning through this, blob of stuff you can't see, and you see this structure. You look at it and you think, a mind put that there. Like that is an intricate structure that looks like it was built by a human.
Organized.
Yeah. And that was such a neat experience to see that for yourself, and to see, you hear about all these molecular structures. Along with the centriole, you've got the flagellum, a molecular motor, runs at 100,000 RPM, built up of 40 different proteins. And to see how all these things are intricately designed, to me, that is the ultimate and the most important and the main argument for a creator.
Yeah.
From a scientific perspective.
We steal, humans patent it, and like patent designs that are in our body. Like the heart valve, that was the valve in the real world, patented because a scientist was looking at our heart and was like, that's a really good valve. I'm going to copy that. And so there's things like that all the time where people look inside and create something in the real world with it. And
here's what we often don't see. When we talk design, here's what we're talking about. Recognizing design is a purposeful arrangement of parts. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing a purposeful arrangement of parts. And so perhaps the best example of that is in DNA itself. DNA is just made up of 4 letters. We call them letters, but they're just dead, lifeless chemicals. They're completely dead. There's nothing special about these letters at all. But the arrangement of those letters is what produces you. I mean, we have 20 to 22,000 genes in our body, and they're all just specific arrangement of those 4 dead, lifeless letters to produce us. And here's one really good example of that. Spider silk. Incredible structure. Military even talks about using it instead of Kevlar because of it's elastic, it's flexible, it is stronger than steel on a weight-to-weight basis. So it's incredible structure. That is a protein that's produced by the spiders. It's a protein. And you can now, in our molecular age, we know what the actual letters are that make up that protein. There are 3,800 letters, amino acids, that make up that protein.
Wow.
Which, when squeezed out of the rear end of a spider, makes something that's stronger than steel. Who programmed that? It's not that, you can just jumble together 3,800 letters and accidentally stumble across something that's stronger than steel. This is an incredible structure that is simply a protein with that information programmed into the DNA. Mm-hmm. It's just mind-boggling how anyone could think that came about by chance random mutations over time.
And that's their whole deal, right? I mean, without the tensile strength of that silk, they don't eat. So it's crazy.
Yeah, another couple of my favorite examples. The Venus flytrap. Mm-hmm. So this is just a fun one because you have a mousetrap, and a mousetrap is pretty simple. It's got a platform, it's got the actual kill bar, it's got a switch, and it's got the holding bar, and it's got a spring, 5 parts that make up a mousetrap. And if you remove one of those parts, are you going to catch any mice? Yeah, so that's what we call irreducible complexity. You have to have all the parts there functioning at the same time. And now compare that to the Venus flytrap, which is incredible. It's one of those things you stumble across it and you're like, this screams a designer. So the Venus flytrap it's made out of leaves. Yeah, but on those leaves, there is a hinge between the 2 leaves. And it's got those finger-like projections that create the claws almost to help capture it. So just like a mousetrap, it has to have a trigger. It cannot just be closing for any particular reason. And so you will have, if you look very closely at those leaves, each leaf has 3 little trigger hairs on it. And unsuspecting fly goes, oh, okay. It also this trap produces its own bait. So it has nectar producing cells on its surface. So that attracts the fly in there. And if it hits one of those trigger hairs, nothing happens. By design, because it can't just be closing for any small reason. If it hits one, nothing happens, but it starts a timer. And if it hits a second one within a 15-second time window, that's enough to trigger the trap. And then through a calcium gradient, these cells all start releasing calcium in a fraction of a second. It closes. It now has cells that secrete a stomach acid that digests this fly. And then a week later, it opens up and you just have the empty carcass of the shell. And think about that from the mousetrap perspective. All of those parts had to be present at the same time. Purposeful arrangement of parts. That's how we recognize design in the world around us and man-made objects. That's the same thing we see in nature.
And the end result of that is there has to be some sort of secretion that happens to digest or whatever it is. So like the end part is the most important, which you wouldn't get the end part in evolution without all the 5 beginning parts working. And if the 5 beginning parts, as they're evolving, there wouldn't be stomach juice at the end, right? Or whatever.
And that you're exactly describing that idea of irreducible complexity.
Yeah.
Everything has to be there simultaneously. And it takes a mind with foresight to assemble something like that.
Mm-hmm. What about the eye? I've always thought the eye, when I look at the eye and the complexity of the eye, that it screamed creator. Because it just, when you think about how the parts work and how, it's got a trigger to your brain, and not only in our eye, but almost any eye, any animal eye, with all the parts that work within the eye. I find that screams creator. I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but that's always been. I've always heard it's just as complex as a watch, and it makes sense. I mean, when you think about all the parts, and if any of it doesn't work quite right, you don't have good vision, right? So
no, absolutely, and for that same reason, it's because of those purposeful arrangement of parts. These parts are here, and they're doing something all together to create. To accomplish a task larger than themselves. Now, Darwin saw the eye too, and he makes a very famous statement in The Origin of Species about how to conceive that the eye with all of its complexity could have arisen by chance seems absurd in the highest degree. So he makes that same statement. And then, so creationists are very fond of pointing that out.
Okay.
But then he goes on for the next chapter to explain how he thinks it could have arisen by, small, minute changes over time. And that's the problem with using a structure like the eye, which is a large structure that there are many different examples of different versions of eyes throughout the animal kingdom. And so they would look at that and say, well, given enough time and chance, we can imagine how small, slight changes could have accumulated over time. Of course, to me, that requires more faith than believing in God. I don't have enough faith to believe that. But I like to focus on the molecular ones because at the molecular level, you can reduce it down to it needs these 40 proteins to operate. You remove one of those, it doesn't work. Now what?
So have you read Michael Behe's book on the Darwin's Black Box?
Yeah, that's kind of a classic in the intelligent design field. And I think it's fantastic. It puts into words what people instinctively recognize about design. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I was just curious. I read it years ago. I have to say, it was way beyond my normal science, so I had to keep calling a friend of mine to help me interpret what I was reading. No lie, because he gets pretty complex in that book at times, as to how he lays it out. So, but it was good, absolutely. So.
I go back to a lot theory of evolution, like things increasing in stature or increasing in complexity. Is there a real world example that has been studied where a transfer of data has improved something? Or is like anytime you transfer something, the only thing that can happen is perfect transfer and nothing is gained or lost, or during a transfer something's lost. So like even the theory of evolution you can't evolve something when you're transferring data such as genes. Something always has to be, everything stays the same or something is lost.
Yeah, so herein lies the crux of the whole issue. This is the whole disagreement between creation and evolution boiled down to one question: is how can you create information? Because in the evolutionary worldview, somehow all these genes, those 3,000 letters in the spider, the silk gene, that information had to come from somewhere. And their answer, do you know where they say it comes from?
No.
I mean, you probably do. It's a mutation.
Okay.
So that's the textbook answer. Yeah, chance random mutations over time build things up, and the natural selection finds slight improvements in a protein function, and that selects for that protein, and then more mutations build up over time, and blah 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 blah. And so this is a complete statement of faith that mutations are able to do that. We know how mutations work. We see them all the time. We've known for, in my PhD, we used mutations to study development. So we would inject the mice with a mutagen, the male mice, and it would kill all of their sperm producing cells on purpose. And then they would repopulate, but all the ones that repopulated were now riddled with mutations. And so then their offspring, we would screen their offspring and look for birth defects. Now, scientists do this sort of thing all the time, and no scientist would ever screen their offspring expecting to look for an improvement. No one.
Yeah,
it's just such an obvious thing. People don't even discuss that, right? You're screening it looking for defects because we know that's what mutations do. Mutations are either deleterious, where they delete the function of a protein. In fact, so my PhD thesis work was about one letter in the DNA that changed and caused the neural tube to fail to close. It could not close with this one letter out of 3 billion letters in the mouse genome. One letter that was changed that caused the neural tube not be able to close.
Have you heard recently? Maybe there's a study that with the vaccine, that's the protein synthesis that's what's happening, is the transferal. I forget what the technical term is, but it's stopping the completion of the transfer of data. I forget what the name is called.
Well, so I don't know exactly what you're referring to.
Transphagal or I don't know. Sorry. A little side rant. I thought I would remember the name of the process, but
there's translation.
Yeah, there's translation problems going on in
Okay, so I'm glad you brought us back to that, because you asked, like, what's the one thing?
Yeah.
I have not yet told you my favorite thing to go to highlight the conundrum that an evolutionist faces. I guess we should go there now.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, because we got another guest coming here. She's gonna be here in a moment now, so for another episode. So why don't you kick us into your favorite?
All right.
So we'll have to get you back here.
Yeah,
we're gonna definitely have you back, because this is a great conversation.
It is the ribosome. Okay, so think this through. This is the in my opinion, the biggest problem the theory of evolution faces is how do you get this ribosome, which is the thing that does the translation. So
these little things, are those ribosomes?
The ribosomes are the actual it's the factory. So you have the mRNA, which is a temporary copy of the DNA, and it has all the information in order to make the protein. So then the ribosome comes along, binds onto that RNA, and it is going to it's going to read the message. It's going to select the right amino acids. Those are the building blocks of the protein. It's going to select the right amino acids and put them in a chain. So it's reading the message. It's selecting the amino acids, putting them together. It reads the whole message, builds the whole chain of amino acids, and then voila, you have a protein. All right, so here's the catch. And this is huge. It's just not even talked about in textbooks. And all right, so you need a ribosome in order to make a protein. That makes sense.
Simple, yeah.
Not that complicated.
Kind of like you got to have an engine to really take a car somewhere.
Sure. Now, what is the ribosome made out of?
Protein.
It's made out of proteins. Over 50 proteins are used to build a ribosome. So the ribosome, which is made out of proteins, is required to make the proteins which build the ribosome. This is a huge chicken and the egg problem. You know, which came first? Did you have the ribosome there in order to make the proteins? But you need the proteins in order to make the ribosome. It's like, this is a horrible analogy, but I'll use it. It's like, imagine a Lego factory that makes Legos. And the factory itself is made out of Legos. So you would need all those Legos to already exist to build the factory before you could start producing the Legos which are needed to build the factory. It's this huge chicken and the egg problem, and there is no even remote explanation for this in the evolutionary worldview. That is my favorite go-to. It's one of those things that's so glaring that the easiest thing to do is to just ignore it.
Wow. That's so. So you find them that they do that. Hey, you find when you have these conversations, they basically just kind of ignore it in the science world.
Well, faith will find a way, and they are people of faith, just like we are people of faith. They have different core beliefs. Faith will find a way, and so they'll throw out. You know, they have to throw out some sort of explanation. They'll say things about an RNA world. Originally, it was an RNA world, and it was all RNA that did all this, and then eventually that transition. That is pure hand waving. Pure smoke and mirrors to hide the fact that nobody has any idea how this could possibly have arisen by chance. The numbers one calculates are beyond comprehension for the chances of a system like this assembling. It's just beyond comprehension.
That's amazing.
Well, there you have it.
That is wow. I know it's been like a short one, but I mean, it's been long since we had the conversation before, but I mean, I'm like sitting here, I'm still digesting everything you just said because that just blows my mind away. I love it. I love getting into the science of God.
I gotta find those videos so we can post this when we put this out. But there's what you're talking about, the translation, the ribosome, like that. I don't know if it's CGI or if they've somehow been able to record with the microns.
Yeah, if you find it, we can link it or whatever. But yeah, that'd be awesome.
Look for maybe the one you're thinking of is called The Inner Life of a Cell.
Maybe
it's a Harvard BioVision CGI production.
It's got the little, and it's like splitting the.
Yeah, maybe there are many out there.
Yeah.
The best one I've seen is this one from Harvard.
All right,
wow. All right,
that's interesting. Yeah, we gotta pick your brain some more.
I know this is a bottomless topic, and there's a lot we didn't get to.
Well, of course, that's you know what? The great thing is that it's a reason to have you back, right? Like we love good conversations. We've had Marv back here 3 times now, I think.
We went to the zoo with the guy.
Went with the.
I heard about that.
Yeah, but you know, we love these kind of conversations because I think more people have them. You know, and then from these conversations, just like us, we'll go back and regurgitate, you know, kind of spin our brains a little bit and we'll go, I should have asked that. Mm-hmm. And then we can ask it next time we see it. Because that's what we do in real life, right? When you're having a real life conversation with a friend and you're hashing things out, you talk a little bit, you go back, you think about it, and then you go, well, did you? Oh, yeah, okay. You know, and you kind of go back and forth. And I love that. That's one of the things I love about podcasts is that we can continue to kind of work out our faith online as people hear these things. Hopefully they're working out their own faith a little bit and they're hearing these things. Maybe they've been challenged. Maybe they've, you know, been somebody that believed because their parents raised them in a Christian home, but never really thought about the science behind it.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, you go to university, you're going to get challenged. You're going to have, if you go to any secular school, you're going to have your ideology as a believer challenged and absolutely they will say they know better than you. They'll do everything they can to crush you probably and try to convert you into what their belief system is, as you said. And if you don't have strong roots, you'll easily bend.
Yeah, and like I said, this is a complex, nuanced issue. There's parts of evolution that are true. And I don't want to drop a bomb right at the end of an episode, but there are parts that are true and demonstratable, and it's important for Christians to be able to distinguish those. Because that was during my master's degree, secular university. My advisor committee, they required that I take the course Evolution, Principles of Evolution, because they learned really early on that I was a Bible-believing creationist. So they required that I took this course, which was not part of the program, but I was required to take it. And so, yeah, you'll go into the lion's den and have to really start to think for yourself, and you can't just rely on what you've been told your entire life, but you have to start sorting through these issues yourself.
Absolutely. And so I think that's what we need to have you back on. I think that should be our next topic to have you back on, is we could talk about the things of evolution that are provable and what that means to us as believers.
Absolutely.
That should be a series you do at Mac.
So
I'm setting you up for your next series at Mac.
That's how I always start my series, is on challenging people on what do you mean by evolution? Because there's part of it that's true, then there's part of it that's faith-based. Mm-hmm. And knowing the difference is the key to really handling the situation well.
All right. So we're going to get you back.
Deal.
All right. Well, hey, guys, thanks for listening in. This has been a great conversation. I could go on forever. I could take a whole afternoon off and just be digging into this stuff. I do, man. Yeah, creationism and eschatology are like some of my favorite discussions. They really are. There's just so much to them. They're so complex, and there's so much to science. I know Scott's shaking his head because I know he's the same way. We could go back and forth forever.
It's the number one truth about God, I think, that is actively being challenged by Satan.
Yep. You take out the beginning, then you have no foundation for the end.
Yeah, I would.
Eschatology.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah. Creationism to eschatology, and how does he do it? What he did at the very beginning: attack the family, attack the first husband and wife, the institution of marriage. So
We attack God's word.
Oh man, guys, this is we're opening another can of worms.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for checking out another episode of Triple Play. It's been awesome to have you guys join us and on this lively discussion, a great discussion, and we'll continue it. We promise. We love this. So, and I've never had a conversation with the biologist like this before, so it's great.
Rachel,
yeah, awesome. Really. Don't forget to support those that support us. We got Andy McCallum and Resource One at 636-458-1798. We got Chris at CS Design, 573-436-3717, and Jeff Earhart with State Farm Insurance at 314-821-JEFF or 5333. Give those guys a holler. Don't forget about Brookes Bible Institute either, where there's a reason we purposely like to talk about them at the front, because just the stuff we're talking about needs to be worked out. Hey, if you're not even wanting to get a biblical degree to go in ministry, but you just want to deepen your faith, good place to start. Cheap Bible, go to a good Bible college, but at a cheap price. It's affordable. Something lay people, I think, should do a lot more. So consider it, and we'll catch you next episode. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you.